Minus 30 in Smiths Falls, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Starting today, parents in the province will be able to see how many students and staff members at their child's school are absent. Comes as Omicron sends a record number of children to hospital with COVID-19. City News reporter Kevin Meisner joins us with the latest.
The stats will be updated and posted on the province's COVID website at 10:30 each day in the morning. It'll have a summary of the previous day's school closures and student and staff absences. Now, with the surge in Omicron cases, of course, the province is no longer tracking total COVID cases among students. Instead, parents will be notified when absenteeism among staff and students reaches 30%, but that will be for any reason, not just COVID. Now, the province's website will also have a searchable database, a table showing the combined absenteeism rate for staff and students by school. The website will show the data for the previous school day. Now, the number of children in the province hospitalized with COVID-19 is at its highest rate since the beginning of the pandemic. Public Health Ontario is telling the Toronto Star that 137 kids under the age of 19 admitted to hospital for COVID in the early part of January. Kevin Meisner, City News.
City News time, 9:01. A traffic note this hour, 401 eastbound between Montreal Street and Highway 15 closed. It's due to a tractor-trailer fire. That truck was carrying groceries. And now for your forecast, here's meteorologist Jill Taylor.
If you have to head out this morning, dress for a wind chill near minus 37. That will ease, though, through the day, and by tonight it won't be as cold. We'll get a few flurries later today. A light east wind, our high minus 13, and then overnight near minus 16. We'll get about 2 or 3 centimeters of snow overnight. For today, the high minus 13.
And right now in Ottawa, minus 28. In Smiths Falls, it's minus 30. Police chief in Ottawa will lay out a plan tonight to overhaul the way police handle sex harassment and violence within the ranks. This is a 5-year roadmap. It goes before the Police Services Board meeting tonight. Here's City News reporter Jason White.
One of the biggest parts of this is changing the way Ottawa Police deals with complaints of workplace sexual harassment and violence. The police service will set up a new independent office of workplace investigations and hire 2 lawyers who have expertise in employment and labor law as well as human rights. Other measures include hiring an in-house psychologist and other new mental health supports for police employees. The police will also establish a new code of conduct. This comes after an independent investigator hired by the police in December 2020 found many members didn't report incidents of sexual harassment and violence, and that they lacked faith the existing system would protect them or resolve their complaint fairly. It is expected this plan to address those shortcomings will cost just over $2.2 million in its first year, more than $8 million in total over 5 years. Jason White, City News.
City News time, 9:03. No word if our federal government will follow the United States and order families of embassy personnel to leave Ukraine. Britain is also withdrawing some diplomats and dependents from its embassy in Kiev in response to what it calls a growing threat from Russia. Now, NATO is putting extra forces on standby. They're sending more ships and fighter jets to Eastern Europe. Ireland is warning new Russian war games off its coast are not welcome. I'm Andrew Boyle. For News Anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Separating headlines
from hearsay.
It's the Rob Snow Show on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
This isn't Blue Monday. Blue Monday was last Monday. I have that right? Yes, I have that right. Are you sure? Kind of feels like it would qualify as Blue Monday. No? Okay, not Blue Monday, according to the fact checkers. Gotcha. I'll take your word for it. Good morning. Welcome to the Rob Snow Show. And welcome to another week of digging into the news, gathering views on the news, getting your views on the news. And thanks for spending some of your time with us today. The news can be a little on the depressing side. I mean, even the weather news, right? Extreme cold warning in effect. Last week we had a blizzard. When was the last time we had, just like a normal winter day? in Ottawa. You know, like -5, go out, enjoy winter stuff. No, it's not today anyway. Public transit. Look at that news lately. You know, we have buses that, they don't work when there's a blizzard. And the great OC Transpo snow tire debate is raging again. You know, why do we have buses that can't work in the worst that winter has to offer in Ottawa? And then you throw onto that snow pile a light rail system that, well, it miraculously worked during a blizzard, but it didn't work when it got really, really cold outside. All because of a clamp. One clamp, according to the news, one clamp moved a few millimeters. And that's enough to shut down half of a $2 billion light rail line for an entire day. Because, one clamp that attaches, the electrical wire to the train. It moved a few millimeters because it was really, really cold outside. In Ottawa, in January, you don't say. Maybe that's the sort of result we should expect when winter testing of light rail is performed in a lab and not in real-life Ottawa winter conditions. One clamp moves a few millimeters. And $2 billion worth of light rail is basically rendered useless for the day. Protocols being protocols and whatnot. Gosh, if you're going to read one news story today, make it this one here. This is Ben Spur and the Toronto Star. Heck of a story. Star investigation. Headline, he worked as a vice president for Metrolinx while the agency awarded his private consulting firm contracts worth millions. Ben Spur is the Toronto Star's transportation reporter. Transportation is his beat. And today, he writes about someone by the name of Brian Guest. Remember that name? Brian Guest? Brian Guest has a major league history here in Ottawa as a liberal political heavy hitter. At the municipal level, worked with Bob Chiarelli when Mr. Chiarelli was the regional chair. He worked on Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson's transition team back in the year 2010. And you may remember, this was in the news not all that long ago. Bob Chiarelli was supporting a public inquiry into all the problems that have been happening with Ottawa's LRT, and CBC News managed to get a copy of an email from Brian Guest to Bob Chiarelli, and in it, it said, "You know who you are screwing with this support for the judicial inquiry, right? You know who you are screwing? You know who you are screwing?" So anyway, some wondered, apparently, why this political heavy hitter turned super consultant with the myriad of political connections would be worried about getting screwed by a public inquiry into light rail. And I guess one of the people wondering that was Ben Spur of the Toronto Star. Thus, we have a major investigative piece of journalism, and all that Brian Guest has to say about it is a big fat no comment. No comment. So, yeah, I mean, get a load of this. Metrolinx, which is this mega agency of the Ontario government in charge of all these mega public transit infrastructure projects, it made this individual, Brian Guest, a vice president of Metrolinx. While at the same time, Brian Guest's consulting firm, which is called Boxfish, was scoring contracts from Metrolinx, contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. It's very unique. In fact, Metrolinx, in the story, calls the situation unique and temporary. Metrolinx says Brian Guest never got a salary from Metrolinx, and there was never a conflict of interest. But yes, it does sound unique. Let's stick with that. Unique. Someone is named vice president of a government agency, and at the same time, their own firm is getting millions, tens of millions of dollars in business from that same government agency where the person is a vice president. So Ben Spur, who worked this story, is going to join me, as I said, 11:30 this morning. It's unique. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, sure is. Yeah. Situation is unique. I would say so. Lucrative, too. And in Ottawa, you know, you get what you pay for. One clamp moves a few millimeters because it's really cold outside, and an entire $2 billion light rail system just, shuts down. But remember, it's not Blue Monday. That was last week. Last week was Blue Monday, okay? Also coming up on the show this morning, Dan McTagg on the price of gas. And, the cost of energy more generally. Dan is a former Liberal member of Parliament from, I would say, a Liberal Party of a bygone era. But we're going to talk about gas prices, oil prices, energy prices. There is also a news report this morning. That would be this one. In the report on business in the Globe and Mail from Matthew McLaren, Ontario eyes hydroelectric projects as demand for power rises. A story that the Ford government has asked Ontario Power Generation to investigate the possibility of building new hydro dams in northern Ontario. Because if we're going to electrify, say, everything, to reduce greenhouse gases, achieve net zero, all of this wonderful stuff, if we're going to power, millions of electric cars, perhaps we're going to need a lot more electricity generating capacity. So we're going to get Dan's take on that. Sean McKenney is on the program 9:30 this morning. President of Ottawa District Labor Council. We're going to talk about workplace safety. What can workers do if they think they're working in a dangerous environment? So dangerous their lives may be in harm's way. And where do they turn if they think those concerns are being ignored by their employer? An issue, of course, that's very much in the news now because of the deadly explosion and fire at Eastway Tank. And we'll do the Talkback Hour. That's coming up between 10 and 11 o'clock, 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. And we're going to get back into the pandemic and the unvaccinated again this morning with this question. Do you have any sympathy for the unvaccinated? Or do you have no sympathy at all for someone who is unvaccinated? A lot of people in Canada are not vaccinated against COVID-19. It's about 8 million people or so, give or take, not vaccinated. And the places they can go, increasingly limited. I take these truck drivers, for example, lots of news about this Freedom Convoy. Last year truckers were heroes. Now they're unvaccinated truck drivers, so I guess they're bad people who should be kept away from everyone else. The unvaccinated in Quebec, as of this week, they're banned from most big box stores. A few weeks ago, it was banned from the pot store, banned from the liquor store. And all of these policies are very popular. Pollsters are asking Canadians, what do you think about putting the unvaccinated in jail for 7 days? And 1 in 4 Canadians say, yeah, go for it. I'm all for that. Throw the unvaccinated in jail for 7 days. Okay. Have them pay a special tax because of the costs that the unvaccinated put on the healthcare system. All of this stuff. So I just want to ask you, given everything that's been going on here, do you have any sympathy for someone who remains unvaccinated and is increasingly isolated, or do you have no sympathy at all because decisions have consequences, and you could say they made their own bed. Talkback Hour, every morning between 10 and 11 o'clock, 750-1310 on a busy Monday morning. Here on the Rob Snow Show on the City News.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News 101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
Let's talk about the price of gas. Dan McTagg is back with me, President Canadians for Affordable Energy. Good morning, Dan.
It is, unless, of course, you have to fill up or have to turn on your furnace to keep warm.
Well, it's the warming up of the car because it's so cold, you feel like, I don't want to waste those precious liters of gasoline because I'm not really driving anywhere, but I do like the comfort of getting into a warm car. So, nevertheless, I was driving around town this morning. $146.9 seems to be an average price per liter, regular unleaded. I'm wondering, how close is that to a record for the price of gas for Ottawa, Dan?
Well, on the weekend, in fact, on Friday, we saw $148.9 at several stations. And that's a price we haven't seen since, we'll get tested at first on October 15th, but then we saw the high watermark for prices here in the nation's capital at $1.48.9 back on November the 4th. And that's when oil was trading for about $84 a barrel. It's a little high. It was a little higher than that back, a little bit before that, before Omicron, suddenly made its presence felt in the last week of November. And of course, ever since then, gas prices have really struggled to get back up to where we're now seeing them this week. I think this is, again, the high water mark. I don't think it's going to go much higher for now, only because I think markets are fearful of the implications of the U.S. Fed meeting and what interest rates will do to dampen economic activity. And that means, of course, short term, in the month of January, when there's very little demand, oil prices tend to be very stable. They're not this year. It's likely that we probably won't revisit these high prices for a couple of weeks still.
Would you expect these prices to retreat at all?
A little bit, but not much. And again, overhanging all this is two major geopolitical medical factors. The geopolitical, will Russia attack and invade the Ukraine? What will the U.S. and global response be? And on the health side, of course, I was listening to Dr. Anthony Fauci in the United States yesterday suggesting that Omicron may have peaked. Those are two important factors because both have really bullish signs for energy prices. They suggest together and combined would mean greater risk, volatility, geopolitical considerations, and a likely increase in surge in demand in February and March. We could then do what I've been saying for some time, break into all-time new records. And remember, if on Friday we saw $48.9, you were literally at the record. Not that many people noticed or took notice, but it seems to me that an increase of in the order of 5 to 10 cents a liter as we head towards spring months, higher demand, new carbon taxes will definitely bring prices to all-time records here in Ottawa.
So, but again, it depends what happens with the pandemic, whether we're on the other side of this Omicron, and whether that continues to contribute to an economic recovery.
Demand is surging, and Omicron's end, if I can call it that, would certainly be helpful to increasing demand, not decreasing demand, and so that would only the world is undersupplied when it comes to oil. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but the reality is that we're now at levels of inventory, oil inventory for January. Again, this is not a big time of year where there's a lot of demand. That are 8% below the normal. And so I think it's a safe bet that it's going to be a very expensive 2022. And that, of course, will continue this to add pressure to this inflationary spiral that we're seeing here in Canada.
Okay. What are you hearing about the prices for other heating fuels, natural gas, propane? Are they hitting records as well? Give us a sense.
Well, diesel, propane are still considered very expensive, although not as expensive as one would have imagined. But diesel prices are anyone driving around with using diesel knows that prices have gone to near record levels as well. And in many places, we're approaching $1.50 for a liter of diesel. Natural gas has gone up twice, of course, regulated here in the province, but up 25% in October 1st, another 15% on January 1st, a likelihood of another 15%. So they have gone up, these products and these prices, but heating is certainly more expensive than it has been for the past 4 or 5 years. We have to remember, of course, that there will be on April 1st yet another tax for all those products, including gasoline, diesel, propane, and natural gas.
Okay, what taxes are on the way?
So in the case of April 1st, April Fool's Day, we will see a 2.5 cent increase with HST for gasoline. By the way, next year at the same time, April 1st, it'll be more like 3.5 cents because we accelerate the first tax, the carbon tax, by $15 a ton rather than $10 a ton. Diesel will be up by about 3 cents. Natural gas will, of course, increase by an MBTU. It's a kind of by a similar amount of about 3%, and it's ditto for propane. So all these prices, whether we're turning our furnace on or not, will increase. Of course, it does mean more expensive prices for manufacturers who use both propane or, in this case, natural gas to produce styrenes, to produce higher value-added goods. It will also, of course, mean higher prices for our farmers who are currently struggling, and it's something maybe we'll hear a little bit more about as we head towards planting season, and fertilizers like nitrogen are not available. If they are, they're double the price. That can only add more fuel to the fire as far as inflation and the cost of groceries.
Okay. I'd like to get your thoughts in your role presenting Canadians for Affordable Energy on a story that's in the Report on Business this morning, headlined Ontario Eyes Hydroelectric Projects as Demand for Power Rises. Quote, anticipating surging demand for electricity, the Ford government has asked Ontario Power Generation to investigate the potential for building new hydroelectric dams in Northern Ontario. The Ministry of Energy gave OPG the task of working with the Ontario Water Power Association and Industry Lobby Group. Together, they'll update previous evaluations of hydroelectric potential in the north, including life cycle costs of building new stations as well as water availability. What do you think about that? Building more hydroelectric dams? Is that a good idea for the province? Or
yeah, I think if the geology supports it, then fill your boots. The question is transmission costs. It's also where's the surging demand occurring? If it's occurring in the big cities, as we have more people, using computers, more people plugging in for electric vehicles that they're anticipating, then I think we're also going to have to be honest and say that pretty much every street in this country is going to have to be dug up, and new transformers and lines are going to have to be improved, because you can't have everybody plugging at the same time. This is obviously demonstrated by what's happening in California with limited alternatives, especially if we go more and more to reliables like solar and wind, which, as we've seen over the past several weeks, aren't very reliable. Now, for the other factor in Northern Ontario that intrigues me in this is the Ring of Fire. And I think that's, if this is designed for that reason, then I think that makes a lot of sense. But I, again, caution, the geology is going to be a real problem. There's a reason why we didn't do this in the 1960s when we adopted nuclear, and that turned out to make Ontario's energy prices back then, before it was fiddled around by the Ontario Liberals in the 2010s. It made Ontario extraordinarily competitive, and we were a magnet for attracting both investment and business and jobs in Ontario for a good part of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s.
Just recent history is not kind to big hydro infrastructure projects, whether it's Muskrat Falls or Site C and BC, even Big Becky here in Ontario. All of these were way over budget and way behind schedule, right? So,
and in fact, that's probably something we should talk about, because it is, in the case of Muskrat Falls, the federal government had to bail out $5 billion of money we don't have. Site C is more than double the price and still going up. The other problem, of course, is whether or not these things will pass the new, environmental muster. Quebec could not do the hydroelectric plants and dams that it did, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, under current environmental strictures. So I'm not sure how Ontario is going to get around it. There are probably, a lot of small operations that can work, but let's hope it doesn't look like the green energy fee and tariff process, which winds up, tripling the cost of electricity. By the way, Rob, a lot of people tend to forget, on the books here in Ontario, because of that green energy, we're still looking at an increase in the debt of $6.5 billion a year just to pay for the green energy scheme that was implemented. It's to shield us from the much higher cost that we would otherwise be paying.
Okay. Thank you, Dan McTagg. Always good to hear from you. Stay well.
Thanks, Rob. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye. From Canadians for Affordable Energy, Dan McTagg. Sean McKenney, Ottawa and District Labour Council President. Right after the news, this is City News.
Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Monday, January 24th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, minus 25 degrees. And here's what's making news this hour. COVID website in the province will be updated in about 1 hour from now at 10:30. This will show how many staff and student absences are at each school across the province. It's a new initiative that begins today to show where COVID outbreaks are happening. Police Services Board tonight will review a report into workplace sexual harassment and violence within the force. It includes a new office independent from the department that will handle any internal complaints on those issues. It is the first step in an $8 million project that will last over the next 5 years. The United States among the countries ordering staff at its embassy in Ukraine to leave. Still no word from our federal government whether there's a similar plan for Canadians. This is happening as NATO responds with ships and fighter jets to the region to counter Russian military buildup. City News Time, 9:32. I'm Andrew Boyle. For News Anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
He's a pillar of community opinion.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM.
And 1310 AM.
Sean McKenney is the president, Ottawa District Labour Council, and is with me this morning on City News. Morning, Sean.
Morning, Rob.
Yeah, it's great to hear from you again. Thanks for taking the time for us this morning.
Sure.
In its editorial on the weekend, the Ottawa Citizen said that the Eastway fire investigation must be transparent, and I'm sure on that we can all agree. I'm sure you would agree with that the investigation has to be transparent, right? Yep. What does transparency look like, in your opinion?
An openness, a dialogue, communication from each of those levels of investigators, whether you're fire or whether you're Minister of Labour, whether you're TSSA, whether you're the police, but communication to the general public in respect to where they're at. Certainly, I don't think anybody expects that anything that they would release that would jeopardize any part of the investigation, but just an openness and a transparency.
Okay. What sort of investigation should there be, in your opinion?
Well, I think all of the investigations are important. Our position initially, and it has been that way for a long time, is that there be parallel investigations, and we're seeing through media that is the way apparently it's taking place. So fire does their investigation, TSSA does theirs, Ministry of Labour does theirs, police does theirs. So often what's happened in the past was that Ministry of Labour would do the investigation. Those other levels then would get together with Ministry of Labour and would get their information from the Ministry of Labour. So when we're seeing things like parallel investigations, again, those are positive things for us because that means that each one of those bodies are doing their investigations, and they are different. If you're doing a criminal investigation, you have witnesses to speak with. That's one line of questioning. Ministry of Labour may use another line of questioning in respect to their investigation with potential witnesses. Okay.
What do you want to know?
Well, what we want is for this not to happen again.
Okay.
Something happened here. It's not an oops, and I think everybody can agree there. And I've been doing this kind of work for a long time.
Yes.
And it's not good enough to say that accidents happen. Oh, come on, John, accidents happen. It's dangerous workplace. Look, there's welding torches, for God's sakes, and there's propane and there's gasoline that can catch fire, which is why we have things like Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations to ensure that those two don't mix. Why we have things like joint health and safety committees. That way the guys and gals get together and talk about workplace safety and ensure if there was an incident or a near miss, that be rectified. And if there are rags on the floor that where a spark can hit them in respect to somebody that's welding, well, let's find another place for those rags, or let's find another place for that welding to take place. So that's the piece. I mean, health and safety. Look, these 6 folks plus the individual in the hospital, they fully expect to come home at the end of the day, Rob. They weren't able to do that. That's sad. They ought to have. There's no question about that. There has to be a penalty here somewhere down the road. Somebody messed up. I'm not sure who it was, not sure. And hopefully, and we're confident that those investigations will lead to finding exactly what happened here. Somebody has to pay a price here so that this act as enough of a deterrent that it not ever happen again in our city.
Okay. The company's owner denies any allegations of unsafe practices. There have been news reports from victims' families saying that fears were expressed in the past of unsafe working conditions. Let's say someone raises a concern about unsafe working conditions. What's the course of action after that concern is raised?
It's a good question. And it's one that we deal with all the time. Certainly, a worker at a workplace has rights under the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Okay.
My experience has been that often that worker is afraid, doesn't want to flag a certain situation for fear of reprisal. If they come across as an individual who constantly complains about health and safety, the employer doesn't want that individual on the site. But there are pieces to this, like the health and safety rep, like the Joint Health and Safety Committee, where that worker could go to, could speak to in confidence. They could call the Minister of Labor as well. We highly encourage that kind of thing. So they could make an anonymous call to the Minister of Labor that things aren't quite safe at that particular workplace. That's what they should be doing, flagging that particular situation. My understanding from reading the press is that Mr. Green attended some of those, most of those Health and Safety Committee meetings. I have no idea if he attended those meetings or not. Right. But if he would have, then he would have certainly got a sense of any kind of reports such as near misses on at that particular workplace.
But do you want the health and safety? I'm unclear on this.
Yep.
Should a health and safety committee be independent of management or ownership?
Well, they have to work together.
They have to work together. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. But at the same time, if you have our position has always been, if you have a health and safety rep at the workplace, that individual should be more aligned with, and you do have two groups, Rob. I mean, that's just a fact. As much it would be great that you have both all workers and the employer working together and it was one big happy family and kumbaya and all of that stuff. Yeah. That's not reality. Reality is that you do have that separation between the workers and between the employer. So it's important that, like with a health and safety rep, that be an individual who is a worker at that particular workplace, because they understand. Often those in managerial roles, Rob, and you know this to be so, if they've not worked on that shop floor, if they've never worked on the shop floor, aside from a visual piece, they have no way of knowing what it's like to work there from 7 o'clock in the morning till 4 or 5 o'clock at night.
Yeah. But what if you're, and I'm not alleging that this is what happened here, but what if you're concerned and you really feel that your concerns are falling on deaf ears? Your health and safety committee or your rep on your health and safety committee, nobody's listening to you. What can you do? I mean, other than quit,
Which some folks did because they felt that they had no alternative but to quit. But they can get a hold of the Ministry of Labor and express those concerns to the Ministry of Labor. And often the Ministry of Labor can act in such a way that they don't necessarily have to identify that individual. A lot of workers aren't aware that they can do that. Now, ultimately, it could be that at the end of the day, they would have to be identified. So that's the unfortunate piece. But health and safety is so important at the workplace. And so often people just don't pay attention to it. It becomes just a matter of fact. And that's the unfortunate thing, because as a result, then lives are lost, as we saw at Eastway just a week and a half or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. How would you describe, just more generally speaking, bigger picture right now, the regime for workplace safety inspections at dangerous job sites, jobs that would be deemed to be on the dangerous side, whether that's in the building trades or something like this involving welding and volatile materials, these sorts of things. I mean, do we have enough inspectors? Are they proactive enough? Do we have enough surprise inspections? These sorts of things.
And that's and it's a good point. So no, we don't have enough inspectors. No, we don't have enough surprise inspections. I've never understood fully why there weren't more surprise inspectors. I mean, I pick up the call to call employer, tell employer you're going to be there in 2 days to inspect their work site or their workplace, gives that employer the opportunity to fix things that should never have been there. So we need more inspectors, absolutely. We need surprise inspections, absolutely. But more importantly, we need every single workplace to focus all the time on health and safety and adhere to the regulations and the Occupational Health and Safety Act, because they exist. And if they're not adhered to, then what? The only thing that makes sense, because a $450,000 fine, that was the fine for the Olivier Bruno back in March 2016 when he was killed. That's what the employer had to pay. I would like to think my life was worth more than $450,000. The only way that the message is going to be delivered with some people, not all, because there's a number of employers in this city that adhere to health and safety. There are a number of building trades, construction companies that adhere to health and safety requirements. They're good, strong companies, but there are others that are lax in that particular department. The only way that the message is going to be sent, and it's not through money. It's not through money. If somebody spends some time in jail as a result of that, that sends a message, and that's there in Criminal Code of Canada. Through the Westray bill, that when we saw those individuals that lost their lives as a result of that. So that's the kind of thing that we think will act as a much more of a deterrent.
Okay. So as you said, there are multiple investigations happening, kind of parallel: fire investigation, police investigation, labor investigation. What in your history dealing with these tragic events does it usually take to have an inquest, for example?
Well, there will be an inquest.
Okay.
The question, though, is when will that inquest take place?
Okay.
And I can tell you that what I just referred to, the Olivia Bruno from March of 2016, that inquest has been rescheduled again till the end of July of this year. So that's 6 years from when it first occurred.
Wow.
So
6 years.
The other thing about
6 years.
Pardon?
6 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely nuts. They were going to, originally it was scheduled for October of 2020, and then they claimed because of the pandemic that they had to postpone enough, I guess, not to the family, mind you, because they're still dealing with this. But then I just got an email last week saying that it was July 25th or July 26th, something like that.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. All right. Well, or what about a public inquiry? Something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the citizen editorial that's talking about transparency, that's talking about making sure that this investigation is transparent. I think this whole process needs to be transparent. And the other piece, too, is I think the Auto Citizen editorial hit it straight on when they said that Mr. Green has to do better than just sending out press releases that talk about how concerned he is. He needs to show his face, and he needs to speak to media and answer some really important questions. But, that's up to him to decide if and when he's going to do that.
All right. Thank you for joining me this morning. It's great to hear from you.
Yeah,
Stay well.
Too,
yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks,
Sean
bye.
McKenney is the president of Ottawa and District Labor Council. Rob Snow Show, City News.
He's the opinionated Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Barry McLaughlin is with us every Monday morning, senior partner, transformleaders.ca. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. How are you?
I'm good. Feeling a little pain in the wallet these days with gas prices and food prices being what they are. And the latest reading on inflation, highest in 30 years. All kinds of reports about shortages and higher prices in grocery stores and at other retailers. It's not just grocery stores, hardware stores, whatever the like.
Absolutely.
We have, well, who knows how many by the time it's all said and done. How many truck drivers will arrive in Ottawa as part of the Freedom Convoy?
Yeah.
They're on their way. They're mad about the vaccine mandate, which is now in effect on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
So while all of that's kind of the backdrop for the beginning of our conversation this morning. Meantime, you have this close advisor to the Prime Minister. He tweets out a picture, and it's a nicely stocked grocery store, and he's asked, where are the pumpkins? In other words, you've got this political person with the ear of the Prime Minister kind of making light of all of this is how it comes across, to me anyway.
Yeah.
If you're a leader, though, how do you make sure you don't come across as being out of touch? I mean, people are suffering real economic anxiety right now, I think.
You're right. I mean, this is no longer sort of a theoretical issue. This is a pocketbook issue. It turns out to be pretty close to the number one issue concerning Canadians right now as we kind of gradually sort of emerge from the whole COVID thing. But they're very worried about the cost of living, putting food on the table. And I'm amazed that apology has not gone out yet. I will be 100% confident it will go out today.
Because, really?
Yeah, I don't think you can joke about that. It's interesting about trying to use humor in Twitter. Sometimes it backfires. Like, people just don't find it funny. It was tin-eared, just the wrong thing. I'm sure he was just trying to be humorous about it. But it sort of sounds like you're defending the status quo and not concerned, which would be the opposite of what I think the Prime Minister's been trying to get across. So usually the tweeter himself, if I can use that noun, the Twitterer, should be the one to apologize right away. And the PM is going to be probably asked about it as next media availability. So they're going to move rapidly on this and apologize for it.
Yeah. Alex Wallstead, I believe, is the guy's name.
Wallstead, yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying he's a terrible. I'm just saying that.
No.
If you live by the Twitter, you can die by it.
Well, that's
too.
it.
You got to move quickly when you make a mistake.
Yeah. And you would expect someone who has had that position to be a little more savvy than that. I believe that was the individual also said, no, Trudeau's not on the beach in Tofino. And within an hour, there's a picture of Mr. Trudeau on the beach in Tofino, right?
By the way, people are forgiving, actually. If you do it quickly and not begrudgingly, do it fully, people will forgive you. But we've got to remember that.
Yeah. Now, on this Freedom Convoy, the Freedom Convoy rolling, you see it on social media. People are lined up on both sides of the highway, lots of support. I saw something on Twitter this morning. They're coming from Atlantic Canada now, too. But what is the best way for these truck drivers to get their message across, to sort of get public support and try and avoid getting on the wrong side of the public, because people don't like being held up in traffic, for example.
It's one of these strange. I'm watching that coverage already. They've got quite a bit of coverage. Let's face it. Great visuals. These large trucks on their way. Now, is it just going to be that for the next 4 or 5 days, or are they going to build towards something? Is there going to be a public? Are we going to go and try to get petitions signed, or is there going to be some presentation to members of Parliament? You got to do something with it. They have a GoFundMe campaign, apparently, which is somewhat dodgy. They haven't quite said exactly in any transparency how that's going to work, but we presume they'll get that together.
They had $1 million goal. They've raised more than $2.5 million.
Yeah.
$2.5 million.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I think there were...
$3 million now? Okay, $3 million now. Wow.
Yeah. So I think the point here is that they've got to assure Canadians, well, if you're not going to be vaccinated, then what is the alternative to make sure that we're safe and we can ship goods in here? And, how do we make sure you're safe? Some of it's real, some of it's perceived, of course. I haven't heard that in any of the coverage. Like, what are they proposing as the alternative to being unvaccinated? We haven't heard that.
Yeah. For example, there was a protest in Ottawa. I guess there were a lot of protests across the country this weekend, and there was one in Ottawa, and a friend sent me a video of the protest going up and down Bank Street, and like a lot of signs, F Trudeau and stuff like this, right? That you're not going to win a lot of people over, I think, with that.
Just to me, this is what you have to talk about. Some angry protest gets its 15 minutes of fame, I guess you could call it, but that's about it. When you start calling names and everything else, you just turn off more people than you bring on board. So it also discourages politicians to get on board that bandwagon. So they have a lot more. It's hard to be disciplined dealing with crowds.
Yeah,
crowds get their own thing going and end up with out of control messages.
Okay. There's a major investigative piece in the Toronto Star this morning. We're going to have the reporter on, Ben Spur, who's a transportation reporter. It's amazing that it's in the Toronto Star because it's really has an Ottawa focus. But it's all about Ottawa's LRT and the problems there, Metrolinx, this firm Boxfish, and Brian Guest, who has a lot of ties to political people in Ottawa, Jim Watson, Bob Chiarelli. So we don't need to get into all the details because Ben is going to join us and he's going to kind of tie it all together. But there is this line in it. Guest, who looks likely to be drawn into an inquiry about a burgeoning scandal involving Ottawa's troubled LRT project, declined to comment for this story, saying the terms of his engagement with Metrolinx didn't allow him to speak publicly about his work there. So in other words, it's no comment. I'm sure you've had to advise people over the course of your long career, Barry. When the reporter calls, when do you say no comment? Do you always say no comment? What's generally your advice?
feel that he's adding value. He does have to be quiet when these arise. I can tell you definitively, the engager, the employer, does not want you speaking when these things come up. So he'd be forbidden to say anything.
Okay.
But it is kind of a strange, that he was BP, therefore an employee and receiving contracts through his company at the same time. That's a very unusual thing.
Unique. Metrolinx calls it unique.
Yeah. I think that needs, I'm sure there will be some form of investigation of that, but it does show you he has a survivability, which is quite unprecedented. Yeah.
No, it's not unprecedented. It's unique, Barry. It's unique.
Yeah, that's right. Unique.
Unique. Yeah, it's unique.
Well,
it sure is unique. Yeah. You're vice president of a government agency and collecting sole source contracts from the same government agency that you're vice president of, and there's no conflict of interest there. Oh.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the sound, from Metrolinx, it didn't sound like they were going to look into it. I guess they knew all about it. And by the way, to be fair to him, if they've okayed this, then he's not in contravention of his contract. He's not in contravention of his employee responsibilities. So, he could target him, but if Metrolinx approved this, they got to own this issue, not him.
Okay. All right. Very interesting take. As always, Barry McLaughlin, thank you for your time this morning. Bye-bye. Senior partner, transformleaders.ca. Talkback Hour. Coming up next, we're flying right through the morning here. 750-1310 on this question. Do you have any sympathy for the unvaccinated? Coming up, 750-1310. This is City News.
WW 1310 AM in Ottawa.
And CJET 1011 FM in Smiths Falls and the Valley. Number one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 1011 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Monday, January 24th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, minus 25 degrees. And here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Starting in about a half an hour, parents in the province will be able to see just how many students and staff members at their child's school is absent. It comes as Omicron sends a record number of children to hospital with COVID-19. Kevin Meisner now from Queen's Park with the latest.
The stats will be updated and posted to the province's COVID website each morning at 10:30 with the previous day's data on school closures and student and staff absences. Now, both the Toronto Public and Catholic School Boards say if they become aware of a positive COVID case, parents of students in the affected classes will be notified. The number of children in Ontario hospitals with COVID-19 is at the highest it's been since the pandemic started, but doctors say that's a result of Omicron's ability to infect far more people, not an indicator of more severe illness. Public Health Ontario tells the Toronto Star 137 children under the age of 19 were admitted to hospital for COVID between January 6th and the 20th, including 77 children under the age of 5. At Queen's Park, Kevin Meisner, City News.
Now, an organization representing Ontario home care providers says that sector is in crisis. Home Care Ontario says before the COVID-19 pandemic, providers fulfilled requests for care 95% of the time, but now that's dropped to 56%. The organization says the shortage is also putting added strain on hospitals in the province. The latest numbers show 582 patients would be eligible to leave hospital with publicly funded home care if the resources were available. City News time 10:02, and now your forecast with meteorologist Jill Taylor.
If you have to head out this morning, dress for a wind chill near minus 37. That will ease, though, through the day, and by tonight it won't be as cold. We'll get a few flurries later today. A light east wind, our high minus 13, and then overnight near minus 16. We'll get about 2 or 3 centimeters of snow overnight. For today, the high minus 13.
And right now in both Ottawa and Smiths Falls, it's minus 25 degrees. Ottawa's police chief will lay out the plan to snuff out sexual harassment and violence at tonight's Police Services Board meeting. Here's City News reporter Jason White.
This plan includes setting up a new independent office of workplace investigations to handle complaints of sexual harassment and violence within the police service. It'll be staffed by 2 lawyers who have expertise in employment and labor law as well as human rights. Other measures include hiring an in-house psychologist and rolling out other new mental health supports for police employees. They'll also establish a new code of conduct. An independent investigator hired by the police in December 2020 looked at how the police service handled complaints of sexual harassment and violence, and the news wasn't good. It found many members didn't bother reporting incidents and feared retaliation if they did. This plan to address those shortcomings is projected to cost just over $2.2 million in its first year, and over $8 million in total over 5 years. Jason White, City News.
City News time 10:03. Amid rising tensions between the West and Russia over Ukraine, American President Biden considers sending American troops to Europe.
ABC News confirming the U.S. is considering sending several thousand American troops to the Baltics and Eastern Europe, as well as warships and aircraft. Sending more U.S. troops to the region is part of a range of options the administration is developing as it seeks to reassure European allies, all the while deterring Russia, according to a U.S. official. This comes as NATO also says it will be sending additional ships and fighter jets to Eastern Europe. Inez de la Quatera, ABC News, at the Foreign Desk.
And I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back.
On the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
And away we go. First talk back hour of the week. Do you have any sympathy for someone who remains unvaccinated against COVID-19? Are you sympathetic toward the unvaccinated because of the limits on things like mobility or employment, for example? Or do you have no sympathy at all for the unvaccinated because they made their bed? Decisions have consequences. It was a decision that they made. They decided they wouldn't get vaccinated. Nobody did this to them. 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. That's where I want to start this morning. Let's get right to it. People have already called in. Look at that. Cliff in Kempville. Good morning, Cliff.
Morning, Rob.
Morning, Cliff. Do you have any sympathy for the unvaccinated?
I'll preface before my comments, I am triple vaccinated.
Sure.
I was actually early in the game. But I do actually have sympathy for these fellows. I have been an employer of independent truckers for a number of years. And particularly in the food industry, where it seems to have caught everyone's attention, food not being on the food shelves as a result of these truckers, doing this demonstration. But I may remind you that the government started this in that they've taken away these fellows' income. Not only would someone have to perhaps go on unemployment or whatever, but they've got a $5,000 a month monster in their laneway. They have a large.
You mean the truck payment themselves? The truck payment, yeah.
Insurance.
Insurance, fuel, everything else I can imagine.
The government has basically mandated these fellows out of an income.
Or did they mandate themselves out of an income by refusing to comply with public health orders?
Well, they're independent folks. They're not working for the federal government.
Oh, okay. Right.
So let me kind of describe, if I may, just for a second, in terms of their job function. Particularly, let's take, for example, I'll choose Loblaws. Loblaws paid driver, Loblaws truck. The trucker backs up with either a full or empty load to the dock. The Loblaws employees either unload the vehicle by skids or load it with product to go from, say, Ottawa to Montreal. The trucker drives to Montreal, backs up to the loading dock.
Yep.
The Loblaws employees empty the truck.
Yep.
And he goes on his way.
Right.
An independent trucker these days has very little contact with anybody.
With
and
the
that's
public,
the lifestyle that they've chosen.
Okay.
They like being independent. They like to be doing their own thing.
Okay.
So I don't understand why our federal government would choose to target this category and have such we already have supply chain problems. Why exacerbate that?
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Cliff. Got you completely, sir. Thank you. Chris, Blackburn Hamlet. Chris.
Good morning, Rob.
Do you have any sympathy for people who are unvaccinated?
I do have sympathy and even admiration for them, which I know we shock a lot of people.
Wow. Okay.
I do have family members and several friends who are not vaccinated, and it's tough for them too because of the restrictions. But that's the choice that people make.
Right.
I'm one of those people who feels I love that saying. As Ben Franklin or somebody said it. Somebody dug up this quote saying, "People who choose freedom over safety deserve neither." But I'm one of those people that's really concerned about government overreach. I'm one of those people who, I understand the need for government and control in their lives to some extent, but when it comes to saying you have to get this injection or else you're a pariah, I just don't agree with that thought, that way of thinking. I also would say that I understand the arguments that people give when they say, they're taking up spaces in hospital rooms. But an unvaxxed person who is in, generally speaking, good health most of their life is probably doing better than a vaxxed person who hasn't taken very good care of themselves. So there's that argument, too. And last week, you guys discussed that on your show about people who were not taking very good care of themselves.
Right.
They're going to end up in hospital as well, taking up hospital beds.
Sure, yeah.
But, I was looking at my Facebook feed just a few minutes ago.
Okay.
I was down in Florida last month, and there's a lady staying around the corner from where I was staying. When this argument about, they're taking up hospital beds, we can do both, because this lady on January 7th, she sent out a note to her friend saying, "Pray for my mom, she's not feeling well." 90 years old. That was on January 7th. Then you go to January 10th, her mother had gone to the hospital. They gave her a pacemaker, and she's back home on January 11th. So in Florida, you can go and get your treatment. Like, what I'm saying is that lady was able to go and get her pacemaker installed and wasn't worried about somebody else taking up a hospital bed. So we can do it if we have the proper healthcare system.
Proper healthcare capacity. Yeah.
Capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. He has sympathy. He said even admiration. Okay. Now, my question, do you have sympathy for people who remain unvaccinated? Do you think society or politicians are being too hard on the unvaccinated, making their lives too difficult? Or do you have no sympathy for someone who chooses to be unvaccinated? Maybe you view them with contempt and derision. There is some of that going around. Maybe you blame them for the mess that the healthcare system is in right now, for prolonging the pandemic. I have heard that. I've taken those calls on this radio show for making things worse than it had to be or has to be right now. Just how do you view people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19? 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. Derek, Ottawa. Derek, good morning.
Yeah, I think the argument that the unvaccinated are causing this pandemic to last longer is a false one, because if you look at South Africa, they're pretty much back to normal. Their vaccination rates are they're 40% or whatever. It's way, 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 way lower than Canada, and they're through it. They're done. They're over. So I think that's a false argument.
Okay, it's over. There's no pandemic in South Africa anymore.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that.
All right,
I'm not saying that COVID doesn't
anyway,
exist,
this isn't even my question.
I know. Okay.
Do you have sympathy?
Generally, I think the government is overreached, and I think, as you say, there's consequences. I went shopping, and the store shelves are empty because people are tired of being pushed by the government. So I would say I have total sympathy for people that don't want it. I mean, it's their own bodies; they can make their own decision.
Okay.
So I don't think the government has any right. I mean, it's a constitutional right. Even you can't, I mean, the truckers, they have it right now. They go across the border, and they have to quarantine for 14 days. I mean, how are they going to make a living doing that?
Okay. All right. Yeah, but it's their own choice to do that, though.
Well, no, but it's the government's choice to implement this policy.
But it's their choice not to comply with it, right?
Yeah. So if they don't agree with it, though.
If they don't agree with it.
I mean,
you have your radio on in the background. Like we've been telling people since, 1975 to turn your radio off. James, Ottawa. James, good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, Rob.
Yeah, hi, James. Do you have any sympathy for people who are unvaccinated?
Absolutely. We've all been done wrong by the Canadian government, by corporate authorities, by big pharma. It's just a big cesspool of corruption and disgusting activity by all levels of government. Corruption at every level possible.
Corruption at every level possible. Okay, I think we'll end that one right there. Let's take this call. Bill in Pakenham. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, Bill.
Yeah, I have sympathy for the unvaccinated.
You do?
And I think it started right from the very beginning, almost 2 years ago. The confusion and contradictory messaging that the government presented. Okay. Even from, they said you were supposed to get one jab, and then 30 days, I believe, or 45 days later, you were supposed to get the second vaccine. But then the government postponed that and said, well, you were good for 6 months. But that isn't the way it worked out. I mean, you're supposed
16
to have...
weeks. It was 4 months. Yeah.
But the messaging, over masks, and then restaurants reopened, you could wear a mask to your table, but then you could take it off to eat. And there was all these things that were, a message would come out from the government at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 9:30 they had contradicted it. I was interested in reading the National Post on Friday, where BC's Minister of Health, Bonnie Henry, basically said that they're going to treat COVID-19 in BC as the flu. It was Tristan Hopper that did that report, and apparently Alberta is following suit, that they're basically going to treat COVID-19 from now on as the flu. You're going to have to learn to live with it.
Right.
But I found it interesting when they quoted Anthony Furey when he said, for all the talk about anger at the unvaccinated and how they're the ones prolonging the pandemic, we're also being held back by healthy, vaccinated people who plug their ears when the likes of Dr. Henry offer them good news.
Good point. Yeah, good point. That a lot of vaccinated people aren't, ready to move on yet. Don't feel safe enough to move on yet. And to have restrictions lifted yet, to end mask mandates, these sorts of things, right? I can see that. I can totally see that.
It goes both ways.
Yes, sir. Yes. Agree, Bill. Thank you. Okay, pretty hot one. Wild and crazy. 10:15 Talkback Hour. Rob Snow Show. This is City News.
Show. The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
Do you have sympathy for the unvaccinated, or do you have no sympathy for the unvaccinated? Look, I wanted to ask this. First of all, there's a lot happening on the political front when it comes to the unvaccinated. We're all familiar with the Freedom Convoy that's making its way to Ottawa. Going to be a huge story later this week. And this, in part, is to kind of get ahead of that. But I've also heard it quite often from a few callers, a few guests. I know someone who isn't vaccinated, or I have a family member who isn't vaccinated. It's causing problems in my family, or I've lost friends because of the whole vaccination question. I mean, none of this actually applies to me, mainly because I don't know too many people. The issue of being vaccinated hasn't caused any friction in my family, and I've not lost any friends over the whole issue of being vaccinated. But maybe those are circumstances that apply to you right now, whatever the case might be. I want to get into this issue with you. You know, I've asked in the past on this show questions like, do you think we're being too tough on the unvaccinated? I've also asked, do you think we should be tougher on the unvaccinated? And opinions have been all over the map. So this is kind of a different version of that question. Just given the policies that political leaders are coming up with to try and, I don't know, move people in the direction of getting vaccinated. Do you have sympathy for someone who has, to this point, refused to get vaccinated? Do you feel sorry for that person? Because now there are all kinds of places they can't go. There are things they can't do. Their employment is at risk. Their livelihood is at risk because they refuse to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Or do you come at this from the other side? You know, some people have nothing, and I've heard this, nothing but scorn. No sympathy at all. I think that's actually, you know, the polls would indicate that that's actually the majority opinion in Canada. That, look, we've been swimming in vaccine since last spring. Everyone has had ample opportunity to get the shot. And if people feel left behind or are upset because they can't participate fully in society, then look in the mirror. And that's who you blame. And it's largely the unvaccinated that are creating havoc in the healthcare system. It's the unvaccinated who are more likely to get sick enough to end up in the hospital, sick enough that they end up in ICU, causing someone else who is vaccinated to have a long scheduled medical procedure delayed, and treating anyone for COVID-19 in the hospital, anyone, costs between $22,000 and $48,000. So an unvaccinated person is rolling the dice and potentially costing us all a lot of money. But look, there are no wrong answers. It's about how you feel, after all. 750-1310. So how do you view the unvaccinated person? Are you sympathetic or unsympathetic? Up next is Ronnie, 401 on the 401. Ronnie, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you.
You see, now I come from Montreal, and with what you just said, you're saying that it's the vaccinated, the unvaccinated that's taking up all the space in the hospitals and this and that. But the last couple of weeks, every single time I hear the report the next morning, and I'm always in my truck, always listening to the radio.
Yeah.
And the last, I don't know how many times they're saying that 50% of the people that are in the hospital are unvaccinated. Now, the other 50% is obviously the people that are vaccinated, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So when this all started, it wasn't mandatory. And then all of a sudden, it was supposed to be, you just get the one vaccine and then you get your second one and everything will go back to normal.
Yes. Yes.
Then they changed their thing because they screwed up, waited too long for the vaccine, so now the vaccine doesn't work. So now they're trying to tell you that you go for the third booster and everybody will be back to normal and blah, 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 and this and that. So it's promise after promise, but at the same time,
you feel what, misled on the vaccine?
Oh,
Ronnie,
it's beyond misleading.
Beyond misleading.
The government's all over the place. They tell you that the booster is this and that, and it's going to save you, and blah blah blah. But at the same time, they're telling you that it's not effective against the Omicron. It just helps mild out your symptoms and blah 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 and this and that.
Right.
They're saying that the hospitals are completely full. But I have many friends who have a lot of medical
I understand
issues.
this, and we've been all through the math that's involved in your logic there, Ronnie. But, even if it is 50-50, half the hospital beds are taken up by vaccinated and half the people are taken up by unvaccinated people. There are more vaccinated people. We've explained this 8 ways from Sunday, and I'm not going to explain it again.
But you see, so why even ask a question if you're going to just argue with their answer?
I'm asking you, are you sympathetic or not sympathetic to someone who's unvaccinated? Yes. That's my original question.
Yes, I am sympathetic.
You are? Okay.
By far. And once again, if 50% of the people are in a hospital that are vaccinated and 50% are unvaccinated, then I don't see what your logic is of trying to blame everything on the unvaccinated.
No, it's not me who's blaming everything on the unvaccinated. I'm trying to gather opinion and see where people are. But again...
But what you just finished saying before you put me on the phone was that because of the unvaccinated, they're costing this amount of money, they're costing this amount of space in the hospitals and this and that. But if it's 50% unvaccinated, then obviously it's 50%.
Let's say you have a population of a town and there are 10,000 people in the town. Okay? And 80% are vaccinated and 20% are not vaccinated. So you would have 8,000 people are vaccinated and 2,000 people are not vaccinated. Now, let's say you have 100 people in our town of 10,000 are in the hospital, and 50 of them are vaccinated, and 50 of them are unvaccinated.
Yes.
Would you say the same number of people are in the hospital?
Well, yes, obviously.
Yeah, of course you would, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing because when you take 8,000 on 10,000 is 0.6%, whereas 2,000 on 10,000 is 50 is 2.5%. So it's actually 2.5% of the unvaccinated people in our town of 10,000 are in the hospital. Whereas with the vaccinated people, it's only 0.6%. But you're gonna be here, Ronnie, and tell me the same number of people are in the hospital.
If you're vaccinated, then why are you worried about the unvaccinated?
No, I've been all through this, man. I can't go through it again. Like grown men cry when I do math, but even I can figure this one out. Ronnie, come on. Jennifer in Ottawa. Jennifer.
Hi, Ron. Hi, Rob.
Yeah, hi, Jennifer.
In response to Ronnie's question, like if I'm vaccinated, why do I care about the unvaccinated? It's because in my family I have people that are not yet eligible to get vaccinated. And so I feel they're exposed, and I wish everyone could do their part and actually get vaccinated to protect those that weren't even eligible to get vaccinated before schools opened up again. And I know kids are at lowest risk and all that kind of stuff, but until my kids can be fully vaccinated, I would appreciate it if they were surrounded by people that were. And kudos, like I do have a teeny tiny bit of sympathy for people that are unvaccinated,
right?
Because they believe in it for whatever reason. Sometimes I feel like it's a lack of information, and thank you for trying to explain the math again there. But kudos to them. It takes guts to come forward and say, you know what, I'm opposed to vaccination for whatever reason. I think it was a bit clever of the government. I think they are trying to crack down and make it inconvenient to encourage people, because sometimes I think maybe it's just laziness on their part.
Okay.
If it impedes them from going to the bar.
Yeah, I also, I'm trying to present a sympathetic case. I think a lot of these measures are going way too far. A tax on the unvaccinated, I think that's going too far. I really worry about this vaccine mandate for truckers. I wonder if the cure is going to be worse than the disease when it comes to these kinds of things. So
the truckers, I think, was a bit more political because, like you've been quoting the numbers where in the States the vaccination rates are lower, and in Canada the vaccination rates are higher, and you'd assume that would be the same for the truckers, right? Well, if Canada is having a bit of a spat with the U.S. right now over potatoes and stuff like that in terms of trade, wouldn't it be kind of interesting If you're imposing this on truckers that have to cross the border, well, it's going to disproportionately hit the U.S. So I thought that might be a bit political.
Yeah, sorry, Jennifer, and I hate to interrupt people. I come by it honestly, okay? It's just the raw numbers, too. Like, we have probably 8 million people in Canada are not vaccinated. Are we just going to tell 8 million Canadians, no, you just can't participate in society? We're just going to shut 8 million people out of society? We're going to say you can't go here, there, you can't have a job? Really? Are we going to do that? I don't know. That's kind of scary stuff, I think. We can get into all of this after the news again. Rob Snow Show, City News.
#1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Monday, January 24th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa, minus 22 degrees. Smiths Falls, minus 25. Here's what's making news this hour. The province has passed 1 million COVID patients since this pandemic began. They went over the mark with another 4,790 cases today. 3,861 in Ontario hospitals now with COVID-19. Latest stats from the province also show 615 of those people are in ICUs. 37 more deaths have been recorded in Ontario from the virus, and there are over 3,800 more cases province-wide today. 339 are in Ottawa, 73 new cases in Eastern Ontario, 40 in Leeds, Grenville, Lanark, 52 in Renfrew. If you want to check on COVID cases in your child's school, the provincial portal expected to launch that feature on their website in the next half hour. Tensions are soaring between Russia and the West over concerns Moscow is planning an invasion of Ukraine. Today, NATO reiterated commitments made, including potential troop and ship deployments. Britain and the States are both saying now they will withdraw some diplomats from Kiev. Ireland is also warning that upcoming Russian war games off its coast would be unwelcome. City News Time, 10:32. I'm Andrew Boyle. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back
on the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
So assuming the latest data on the vaccine rollout is accurate, it says 77.4% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. 77.4% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. So that leaves 22.6% of the population unvaccinated. Big number, right? Canada's population, 38.4 million people as of the end of 2021, according to Statistics Canada. So that's about 8.7 million Canadians that are unvaccinated. Now, some of those people can't get vaccinated. Like the previous caller said, there are people who can't get vaccinated. They're too young, under the age of 5. But I don't know how many people that would be. But I mean, say it's 8 million people aren't vaccinated. Big number, big number. What do you do with 8 million people who are not vaccinated? Do you have sympathy for these people because they're increasingly isolated from society? Or do you have no sympathy for them and say, you should be isolated from society? It's your choice to be isolated from society. 750-1310. If you can't go to the mall or the big box store or return to work, that's your problem. That's your problem. And it's not just the unvaccinated truck driver. I mean, that's going to be a big story all through the week. It's all of the other measures, right? There's been this series of measures. In Quebec, you have a premier special tax on the unvaccinated. Now, to a certain degree, that diverts attention away from a government that has poorly mishandled the pandemic and highlights chronic underinvestment in the healthcare system, in the long-term care system. It's not our government's fault for our gross negligence. It's their fault. It's this group of people's fault. That premier's famous for that. And a few weeks ago, it was, you can't go to the pot store. You can't go to the liquor store. This week, it's big box stores. Like really tightening the screws, Maybe, who knows, maybe at some point a curfew just for the unvaccinated. They love their curfews in Quebec. And it's an approach that's very popular because it sets the majority against the minority, which is how populists operate. Okay, so that would kind of be, I guess, about as sympathetic as I can get, because then again, you have, imagine someone's on a wait list for a medical procedure, and wait lists were long enough before anyone heard of coronavirus or COVID-19 or Omicron or whatever, and now your procedure's been delayed, and maybe it's not the first time it's been delayed. Maybe it's been delayed several times at this point. All because precious healthcare resources have to go into treating COVID-19 patients who are unvaccinated instead of treating whatever condition you have and you're vaccinated. And again, the data says it's the unvaccinated consuming more and more and more precious healthcare resources. Well, then it's easy to be upset at an unvaccinated person and view that person as selfish, not civic-minded, not neighborly, not in it for the greater good. The total opposite of we're all in this together, but only in it for themselves. And it's certainly not easy to have sympathy for someone who only thinks about themselves. And there the opinion could be, cry me a river that you can't go here, there, or just about anywhere, and cry me a river that your refusal to get a vaccine costs you your job. Decisions have consequences, and it was your decision made of your own free will. What an ethical quagmire we are in right now. I mean, how should I feel about the unvaccinated? Should I have sympathy for an unvaccinated person? Because they're increasingly isolated and shut out of regular society? Or should I have no sympathy for the unvaccinated because they're living with the consequences of their own decisions? I mean, that's kind of where we are. Kate in Ottawa. Kate.
Hi.
Hello, Kate. Do you have any? I'm okay, Kate. Thank you. Do you have any sympathy for unvaccinated people, or do you have no sympathy at all for an unvaccinated person?
I have 10,000% sympathy, and I'll tell you why.
All right, okay.
And I thank you for having this conversation, this debate. I think that we're missing a key point to this type of a discussion, not only within your show, but, at our homes with our families and internationally. And that is this. We are trying to have a debate when both sides do not have the complete information accessible to them, right? So I empathize with people that have fear, that are scared, that have lost a loved one. However, our government did not deliver the complete and full information to Canadians, and this is going on internationally, not just in Canada. And so informed consent is not taking place. This is not a vaccine that has ever been used before, and yet within Canada, we feel we should trust our government and trust our healthcare system. With respect to this vaccine, the technology's never been used. It's an experiment, and yet most of Canada is under the impression that, I had my childhood vaccination, it helped me, it cured me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
This information is available and out there to people. And the truckers, everybody has body autonomy. They have the right to make their choice whether to put in an experimental medication into their arm or not, just as anyone else does.
But how do you explain the fact that an unvaccinated person is more likely to get sick and end up in the hospital than a vaccinated person?
So that's actually not true. I'm not sure.
Of course it's true. Yeah.
No. If you go to the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, you can access all the peer-reviewed studies by the experts in Canada, and they're looking at this at an international level. They have Harvard-trained health statisticians that analyze the data coming in worldwide, and you don't have to look far. Last week, the Alberta Healthcare, right on their website, any person, you didn't have to have a science degree, could look at that chart and see most of the people that are in the hospital and or have died are the ones that have received the vaccinations. It was right there in their chart.
But again, I've explained this already. I've explained it already. We have so many more vaccinated people than unvaccinated people. We have to talk in terms of percentages, not big round numbers.
No, but that data was comparing both, right? It compared the unvaccinated with the vaccinated. And right on the chart, you could clearly see the spike. And it's not only Canada, Rob. This is going on international. The Brownstone Institute has thousands and thousands of data analyzed worldwide showing the vaccinated are the ones that are showing up in our hospitals. Right on the WHO website today, anybody can go and look, and it actually says, we do not recommend the booster. It is compromising people's immune systems. And that's
I don't know where you're getting this information. I don't know where you're getting this information. I'm sure if you went to your doctor would say, get your booster. My gosh, where are people getting this stuff this morning? I don't know. Matt in Ottawa. Matt, good morning.
Yes, hello, Rob.
Yes, Matt.
I appreciate you taking the call. So I'm definitely sympathetic for the unvaccinated for multiple different reasons. I'll start with the fact that after 2 years, not a single additional vaccine's been approved. The funding hasn't been there for Novavax or Covadia out of Texas. The concept that the only vaccines we could come up with after 6 months is an mRNAs, which we knew at the time was going to be not the long-term fix, and yet here we are.
How did you know that, Matt?
Well, it's based on the science that an mRNA was specifically taking the DNA of the spike protein from the original.
There's no DNA in RNA. DNA and RNA are two different things.
Yes, but it's based off of the original spike of the original protein.
Right.
So now that it's mutated,
how do you know that, Matt? How do you know
reading documentation.
By reading. Okay.
We can do research all day.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue that mRNAs are effective. They do work. They do help people from hospitals.
Yeah, see, again, we're going down this kind of rabbit hole of all this crazy, the vaccine does this and the vaccine does that. To me, I'm kind of like, I'm so tired of this. I'm not even going to take calls on this anymore. The question is, are some of these policies going too far? To the point where you have sympathy for an unvaccinated person. To me, it's not about the science around the vaccines, the quality of vaccines, the research that went into the vaccine. I'm not going down the rabbit hole of the anti-vaxxers. We've entertained that already for far too long for the last half hour here. It's the increasing isolation, ostracizing a great many people. Like, we're talking about millions of people, livelihoods, jobs. These are the issues. It's a special tax on people that brings into question the very universality of our healthcare system. That's the sort of stuff I was hoping to get into. Instead, I'm having nothing but phone lines filled with people who are somehow YouTube experts on vaccine science that I suspect most of us have no idea what we're talking about when it comes to that stuff. If we can't even wrap our heads around the difference between the percentage of people who are in the hospital as opposed to the raw numbers of people who are in the hospital. 10:45, Rob Snow Show. Tomorrow's topic on the Talkback Hour, cat videos. This is City News.
1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
A lot of these issues are, it's going to take people in robes to settle it. You know, it's all going to come before the courts. A lot of this stuff, I suspect, whether it's taxes on the unvaccinated or mandates for cross-border truckers, and the government will have to make the case. You know, that what it is trying to accomplish is it pressing and substantial? Is it pressing and substantial? Is it pressing and substantial to get everyone vaccinated? You know, the government thinks yes, and that it's so pressing and substantial that people in certain professions must be vaccinated or not be allowed to work. So pressing and substantial in the case, this is the case that the government of Quebec is trying to make. It's so pressing and substantial, there should be a tax for people who refuse to be vaccinated. The government is going to have to inevitably go before a judge and have to make that case. We have already been here before. Even before it was COVID-19 vaccines, we were here with flu shots. There was labor arbitration involving flu shots. And a labor arbitrator in British Columbia ruled that patient safety with flu shots was pressing and substantial. We had a case called the Baudouin case that involved public health orders that limited gatherings for religious services. And in that case, the judge found that public health is a pressing and substantial objective. And therefore, having public health orders that limit the size of, say, a congregation at a religious service is constitutional. We have what's known as the Taylor case involving a woman. You may remember this. Remember there was a woman who was denied entry. This was the very earliest days of the pandemic, and there were lockdowns in the Atlantic bubble and everything. A woman was denied entry to Newfoundland and Labrador to attend her mother's funeral. And in that case, the court found that protecting people in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador from COVID-19 constituted a pressing and substantial objective. And therefore, that travel restriction that limited that woman's ability to go to her mother's own funeral was constitutional. Pressing and substantial. It's a major league legal hurdle that governments need to overcome. And then you have to look at, is it proportional? Is it proportional? Okay, it's pressing and substantial for the government to want to get everyone vaccinated. But is it a proportional response? Is a special tax, for example, on the unvaccinated, is that proportional? Is limiting the labor and mobility of cross-border truckers proportional to your goal, to your public policy goal, to limit the spread of COVID-19? Now, maybe that's going to be a tougher case for governments to make when they go before the courts and they make it. Because the other side could argue, well, we could have testing for the unvaccinated or any other measures designed to limit the spread of COVID-19. And then, is it rational? Is it rationally connected to the government's objectives? Is it rational to, for example, Mr. Duclos said there should be vaccine mandates for everyone. Is that rational? Is it rational to mandate that everyone in the country be vaccinated? Is that rational? Is it minimally impairing? That's another standard that governments need to meet when they impose these measures. Does it meet the minimal impairment standard? Because courts have said If a government moves to limit freedoms, it has to do so in a way that impairs those freedoms as little as possible. It must be minimally impairing. Do things like vaccine mandates on certain professions, vaccine mandates on everyone, an anti-vax tax, a tax just for the unvaccinated. Is that minimally impairing? Well, wouldn't you love to hear from the Supreme Court on these and other matters? Proportional, rational, minimally impairing, pressing and substantial. These are all important things to keep in mind as we debate. These are very heavy-duty issues. Ian, Carleton Place. Ian, good morning, Ian.
Good morning, Rob.
Morning, Ian.
How are you?
I'm okay, sir. Thank you.
I think, I do have sympathy for people who are unvaccinated.
Okay, yeah.
I believe that, first of all, it should be proportional to the amount of risk your job has on other people. If you need to be vaccinated. Like, for instance, PSWs when you're dealing with elderly patients and whatnot.
You think they should be vaccinated, right? Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But, for instance, a trucker, who doesn't see anyone in his day, who's he hurting by not getting vaccinated, right?
Okay. Yep.
I also would like to mention that I can't help but see some parallels between this and the Jewish genocide.
Oh, come on.
I know that's a farce.
Yeah. So long. You were making some good points up until then, because we're not committing a Holocaust here. Okay. There aren't concentration camps. It's not mass extermination. Come on. Just do better. Chad in Ottawa. Chad.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
Oh, an hour ago I was a lot better. Go ahead. Chad.
First time caller. I had to call in.
Appreciate it.
I have no sympathy. I do have sympathy for family members of those that are not vaccinated or choose not to because their mom or dad may be losing their job or whatever. My daughter got COVID a few months ago before she could be vaccinated. She was pretty sick. I was home with her. Luckily, she was pretty healthy, so she bounced back. But I do honestly believe if the city was vaccinated, she might not have got it. So it's kind of makes it a little personal for me. But I do believe, I have unvaccinated friends, and there's always there's always some kind of conspiracy that they just don't want to believe the facts. And just a couple of callers said we don't have all the information. No, we don't, but we have most of it. We have most of the information, and the information is factual. Just like the other caller with the 50-50 and still can't wrap their head around the actual numbers. I'm not good at math either, but you take a little bit.
But you have to sit down and think about it. If you sit down and think about it, it's not hard to figure out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the consequences are harsh. But if it means people not dying, even if it is what it is, right? I mean, the vulnerable people are going to die if we don't get this right. So I can't sympathize. So no.
All right, thank you, Chad. Can't sympathize. Gotcha. Rodney.
Good morning.
Yeah, Rodney.
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
Hear you fine, Rodney. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sympathy? You have any sympathy
for the truckers on the road? I'll have understanding.
Well, it's not just about truckers. I mean, there are, say, 8 million people across the country who, for one reason or another, are not vaccinated.
Well, I'm going to have some, understanding for the trucker, the trucker that knows that he's going on a long haul, especially if he's paying for his rig, which I'm thinking a tractor-trailer cab must cost $1 million these days or more.
Yeah.
It's a house on wheels.
Right. Yeah.
He's got to figure out the vaccine date, and then there's 3 days after that maybe he doesn't want to be driving on the road because of possible side effects and being on the road with side effects and not knowing if it's side effects or COVID. But on the other side of things, I wanted to sort of help you out or change some of it for all the people that are in hospital, vaccinated and unvaccinated. You can lump them all into the same group because that's going to be the group that's not following the guidelines and the common sense. But there's no legislation on common sense and guidelines, and, that's part of the situation that we're in. And on that topic, at some other point in time, I'd like to call you back and give you some of my observations on that. Or it could be a question.
Well, we can get into that at a later date. We can get into that at a later date, Rodney, because we've got to run because we're tight on time. But I appreciate everyone's call. I really do. Even though we didn't see eye to eye on a great many things today. 11 o'clock news next, and then the final hour. Today's Rob Snow Show, 750-1310. Tomorrow, we'll do another Talkback Hour. This is City News.
The Rob Snow Show, brought to you by Myers.
CJET 101.1 FM in Smiths Falls and the Valley. Number one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Monday, January 24th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa, minus 22, minus 25 in Smiths Falls. And here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. The province has passed 1 million COVID patients since this pandemic began. Another 4,790 new cases today, pushing the total number of cases to 1,001,455. 3,861 people are in Ontario hospitals right now. Of that number, 615 are in ICUs. 37 more deaths have been recorded in the province from this virus, and there are over 3,800 more cases province-wide today. 339 of them are in Ottawa, 73 in Eastern Ontario, 40 in Leeds, Grenville, Lanark, and other 52 cases in Renfrew. An organization that represents Ontario home care providers says that sector is in crisis. Home Care Ontario says before the pandemic, providers fulfilled requests for care 95% of the time. At the end of last year, that number had dropped to just 56%. Home Care Ontario says 4,000 nurses have left the home care sector since the onset of the pandemic. City News Time 11:02 on traffic note for you. There is one eastbound lane now open on the 401 at Kingston, Highway 15, after a transport truck caught fire there this morning around 5:30. Again, one eastbound lane has reopened. Now your forecast with meteorologist Jill Taylor.
If you have to head out this morning, dress for a wind chill near minus 37. That will ease, though, through the day, and by tonight it won't be as cold. We'll get a few flurries later today. A light east wind, our high minus 13, and then overnight near minus 16. We'll get about 2 or 3 centimeters of snow overnight. For today, the high minus 13.
And right now it's minus 22 in Ottawa, minus 25 in Smiths Falls. Have we reached the peak in gasoline prices? The price in Ottawa hovering near record highs at under $1.50 a litre. But thankfully, a leading expert doesn't expect that to go even higher.
I think this is, again, a high water mark. I don't think it's going to go much higher for now, only because I think markets are fearful of the implications of the U.S. Fed meeting and what interest rates will do to dampen economic activity.
Dan McTagg is president of Canadians for Affordable Energy and tells City News we won't be seeing these prices for much longer. However, he says it's likely it will just be a short-term dip when it does. City News Time 11:04. NATO is sending more ships and fighter jets to Eastern Europe as Russia continues a troop buildup near Ukraine.
NATO says it's beefing up its deterrence presence in the Baltic Sea area. A number of members of the 30-country military organisation have offered troops and equipment. Denmark sending a frigate to the Baltic Sea and deploying F-16 warplanes to Lithuania, while Spain has ships joining NATO's standing maritime force and is considering sending fighter jets to Bulgaria. France stands ready to send troops to Bulgaria too, NATO says. European Union foreign ministers are seeking to show a fresh display of resolve in support of Ukraine. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
And I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Strong voice.
Strong opinions.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
All right, let's talk about world affairs right now. It's a complicated world out there. Jeffrey Johnston is back, international affairs columnist with the Kingston Whig Standard. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob.
And I hate to have one international affairs columnist on to talk about somebody else's column because it's like not really fair because you didn't write the column. But everybody's wondering what's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine. Like that is the hot international story right now. And it's an important story for Canada to pay attention to. We're part of the West. We're part of NATO. We have about 1.5 million Ukrainian Canadians, including the deputy prime minister, right? So I want to stick with this situation again. But there was an opinion piece in the Globe and Mail this weekend by Amy Knight. Has written many books about Vladimir Putin, and she argued that when it comes to Vladimir Putin, we may not be dealing with a rational actor, that he lives in an alternate reality, his own reality. It's kind of a Cold War reality, paranoid, surrounded by yes men. What do you think of that assessment of the man?
First off, yes, we need to talk about Ukraine. I've written a lot about Ukraine and Russia, really over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I read the Amy Knight piece. It was very interesting. It had lots of detail. I think there was a big problem with the piece, however. When she says he's not a rational actor, no, I don't agree with that. Russia, and specifically Putin, acts very much in the world of realpolitik. That is power politics. So it's not about values, human rights, or democracy. It's about power and the exercise of power. And even at the very end of Amy Knight's piece, and it was very well written, and as I say, it was well argued, except at the end she contradicts herself, because at the very end she basically admits that the Putin regime is a rational actor because they may, at the last minute, pull back to preserve the regime and its power. So that tells you right there it is a rational actor, because if he were not a rational actor, he would not care about the preservation of the regime. And that's the number one thing in power politics is, preserve your power. Over the years, I've written, as I say, a lot about this. The Ukraine situation, what we're seeing today, is not surprising to me at all.
Oh, really?
So back
okay.
in
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Okay, so in 2014, Ukraine was invaded through a hybrid war by Putin. So he put in these irregular Russian forces not wearing insignia. They were called Little Green Men at the time. They tried to destabilize it before that with psychological ops, and eventually they annexed Ukraine. Well, flash forward to 2018, they escalated this campaign, and for the first time, they openly used Russian forces, and they the Russians attacked 3 Ukrainian vessels in the Strait of Kerch. The Strait of Kerch is the waterway between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and that's between Russia and Ukraine. And they used Russian military vessels to attack these 3 Ukrainian vessels. They took the Ukrainians hostage. They paraded them on television. They forced confessions out of them. And I interviewed Chris Alexander at the time, and he, former Harper government cabinet minister. But before that, he was an international diplomat, and he'd spent years in Russia working on the Putin file. He'd also worked somewhat on the Ukraine file, and he said it was a real escalation because the Russians openly used their naval forces. Putin then built a bridge across this international waterway because under international convention, the Kerch Strait is an international waterway, but he basically seized it for Russia. He built this bridge across the strait so he could attach a physical link from Russia to Crimea. So he was reinforcing his control of Crimea. When we look forward to today with his 100,000 troops on the border there, we cannot assume that this is a bluff because nobody stopped him back in 2018 when he took the Strait of Kerch. And he may not take all of Ukraine now, but he may carve up part of Ukraine, and that may be the end game. He wants to basically whittle away at it. He wants to destabilize it. He wants to make sure that it is not a democratic
What do you think
state.
about there was a report from the UK that he wants to install basically a puppet regime there.
I think that's very credible. He wants a client state in Ukraine. We already know he's got a client state in Belarus, and he's going to do whatever he has to prop up the regime in Belarus. And I think he does want a client state or satellite, because the Soviet Union used to have satellites back in the Cold War days, in Ukraine, because he sees Ukraine, a democratic Ukraine, as a threat. And since Ukraine became independent, it has made great strides in creating its own national identity. And he does not like this. And this is why he keeps falling back on this phony Russian doctrine of protecting Russian-speaking people in the world. And so that's why there's this ongoing war in the eastern part of Ukraine. There are these insurgents who are backed by Russia. They're Russian-speaking. It's in the Donbass region. There are 2 separatist armies there, and there have been, over the years, actual Russian troops fighting there. Well over 10,000 people have been killed in the fighting. The conflict in that part of Ukraine has created the largest internally displaced persons crisis in Europe since the Second World War, not including, the Syrian refugees, but this is an actually European internally generated problem. So this is an ongoing war. It's not like is war going to happen? They have been in a state of war during all of this, and so it is very serious, and I would not rule out a full-scale Russian invasion because it is wintertime, the ground is frozen. If he's going to move, he's going to do it now because he can move his tanks and his armored personnel carriers across the fields before it gets muddy, because if they wait until February or March, then it will become untenable because then the tanks will get bogged down. So we could see something very soon. And the problem is NATO is, I don't think, totally on the same
and we already
page.
had the Americans saying, get out, right? The Americans.
Yeah, so when Biden flubbed it last week, he said the quiet part out loud during that 2-hour press conference. He did overall pretty well, but he obviously said something that he shouldn't have said. And he said that, it depends if it's a full-scale invasion or a minor incursion, and so there might be some differences within NATO. And that is the truth. If there is a small incursion where Putin stops and he only takes part of Ukraine, then you're going to see, as you and I have talked about, maybe the Western Europeans saying, well, maybe it's not so bad, so they could keep their natural gas supplies flowing in the wintertime. And that's another card Putin can play during all of this. And there were reports on Friday that the Biden administration invited the new German chancellor to Washington to talk about Ukraine and was supposedly rebuffed. Now, the White House says that's not true, but when reporters asked the German administration if it was true, they would not comment on the report. So obviously there's some daylight between the Biden administration and the Germans, and this is another thing that Putin will probably try to exploit. So going back to our original point, I say he is a rational actor, but that doesn't mean that he's a good guy and that he cares about international peace and security. He is going to test NATO, and he is going to try to use this crisis to break NATO apart.
Yeah, so what sort of response do you think there could be from, I'm using this term, the West, okay? I don't, maybe it's the weather, maybe it's my mood. We have watched the West draw red lines and then erase them in Syria. The West did nothing as Crimea was annexed. The West did nothing to stop China from betraying Hong Kong. Maybe Taiwan is next. Why should there be any faith that the West would do anything significant to help Ukraine? Terry Glavin from the Post, for example, has said democracy's been in retreat for a decade. And it's left this gaping opening for authoritarians to walk right through, and they have been, right?
Those are all fair points. But I will go back to what we were talking about earlier, realpolitik. Yeah. And there is a big difference between Europe and the Middle East. Ultimately, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way, because I believe in human rights, and we've talked about human rights and humanitarian crises, and I've written a lot about responsibility to protect and intervening in when there are these genocide and other crimes against humanity. But from a pure hard-headed realpolitik point of view, Europe is much more important to the West than the Middle East or even parts of Asia. And as I say, this ongoing conflict in Ukraine is destabilizing Europe, and a full-scale invasion would create a huge refugee crisis. Furthermore, we have allies in the Baltic states, Lithuania, Poland, and we don't want to be drawn into a war. And if Putin then turns his attention and attacks them, we are going to have to fight. So this is why it's important for NATO and the West to grow a backbone regarding Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying we should go to war in Ukraine. We should not go to war in Ukraine, but the West can sell weapons to them, anti-tank missiles. The United States has already actually transferred a lot of weaponry to them. We could also make it very clear that the Russians would be, if they do this invasion, they will be cut off from the international banking system. They will not be allowed to use American dollars to do business. They will be further isolated, and there will be a lot more economic pain for Putin, and that will go into Putin's calculation, because there is a lot of unrest in Russia. There have been public opinion polls that show that Russians are tired of these external conflicts, and they want to see a more prosperous Russia, because life is pretty grim in Russia. It relies heavily on the price of oil. So when there is any sort of drop in the price of oil, the Russian economy tanks, and this affects the cost of living in that country because people can't afford anything. So if Russia is isolated economically and there's a lot of pain, that might deter Putin. If he knows that that's what the West is going to do, that actually might deter him. But at this point, I think there is probably a better than 50-50 chance that he actually invades Ukraine.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey Johnson. Great conversation again this week.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Jeffrey Johnson is with the Kingston Week Standard. David Sally's with the Ottawa Business Journal coming right up. Rob Snow Show, City News.
Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
David Sally is here from the Ottawa Business Journal with us every Monday to talk about some of the big business headlines that the OBJ team is working on. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Rob.
Luxury real estate. Does $1 million qualify as luxury real estate these days?
I was just about to ask you the same question, Rob. What would you consider to be a luxury home.
Well, it's just when I talk to real estate agents, they say, well, whatever was selling last year for $750 is $1 million now. So, the same house that was $750,000 is $1 million, but does that make it necessarily more luxurious than it was a year ago? Right. So
I'm not sure it does, Rob, and I'm thinking that they may have to rethink. Whoever comes up with these definitions might have to rethink their definition of luxury
property. Yeah. But whatever, the point being is, according to RE/MAX, the OBJ is reporting, according to RE/MAX, $1 million is a typical Ottawa real estate transaction. Now, those kinds of properties are booming in Ottawa,
moving
right?
Big time. I mean, that's just it. Obviously, as we know, $1 million doesn't go quite as far as it used to, and
it hasn't made its way to my place yet, anyway. So.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm waiting for somebody to drop $1 million in my lap, and I don't know, Rob. It's not happening.
Yeah,
but anyway, yes. So according to RE/MAX, last year in Ottawa, a total of 1,766 homes sold for at least $1 million.
Sold for at least $1 million.
And that is more than double the previous year's total, which was 750. So go figure. House prices are skyrocketing, and so are the number of $1 million transactions. Now, Ottawa did. I mean, that was the biggest increase among Canada's 5 largest cities in $1 million or luxury transactions. Because, for example, Calgary was next at Ottawa. It was 135% increase. Calgary was next at 123%. Then Toronto was number 3. But here's the thing: in Toronto, RE/MAX doesn't consider $1 million transaction to be a luxury transaction. In Toronto, the bar, and Vancouver, the bar is set quite a bit higher. It's $3 million.
Right.
Is what they consider a luxury transaction in those markets. And so Toronto, their sales are up 113% in that bracket. So, needless to say, it kind of proves what everybody knows intuitively, that it's costing more than ever to buy a house, and suddenly $1 million isn't that sort of milestone barrier that it used to be. Clearly.
Yeah. But once again, it's more evidence that, despite being in the pandemic economy, Ottawa really is kind of fat cat city. We're booming.
Exactly. And, we've got so our economy has held up pretty well throughout the pandemic. And, of course, interest rates are still low, but that could be changing soon. And then we'll see. And I mean, and RE/MAX also, they pointed out, and this is a good point, that there's a lot of trade-up activity that, somebody sells or flips their house, and it's suddenly they got 3 times what they paid for it. So now they have those equity gains, and they have the money to be able to afford these $1 million homes. So it's interesting, Rob. I don't know how much we keep saying every time we talk about this. How much higher can prices go? But who knows?
Who knows? Look, I just want to mention, I meant to bring this up last week. Ron Corbett, I worked with Ron Corbett for a long time, and I've always called him one of Ottawa's great writers.
Absolutely.
And his career as a mystery writer is just hitting new highs. He's one of Ottawa's most prolific publishers now with Ottawa Press and Publishing. But he wrote a piece. Oh my gosh, it was so fun to read for the OBJ Winter News Magazine. Where do I get that? The OBJ Winter News Magazine.
Well,
anyway.
Here's the thing: you can get it. It is available at select locations.
Okay.
But it's. I wish I could break it down for you, Rob. I don't have it at my fingertips.
Okay. All right.
Here, but it's also online. If you go to obj.ca and you scroll to the bottom of our homepage, we are now the link to the digital edition is there.
Okay. Excellent.
And you can read it there. It's also spotlighted in our editor's picks on the homepage at obj.ca. The story, the headline is, "It's a shawarma thing."
Yeah, it's a shawarma thing. It was so fabulously done. And it's about Ottawa's first shawarma shop. And the guy who owned it, and why shawarmas are so prolific. Shawarma shops are so prolific in Ottawa. According to Ron's reporting, there are more shawarma shops than all the major fast food chains combined, like McDonald's, A&W, Burger King, Wendy's, Harvey's. You take all of those, combine them, there's still more shawarma shops in the city.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And we all know, if you've been an Ottawa student growing up here anytime the last 25 years or so, the name Marouche, everybody knows that. And I can still, the song is actually going through my mind right now that he played over and over again ad nauseum in the store when you lined up on Elgin Street there at, let's say, 2:30 on a Saturday night, perhaps. I might have done that once or twice.
Or a Wednesday or a Tuesday. Yeah. But I love that the guy who founded that place, his name is not Marouche, but he was asked, why are they so prolific? And he says, well, the guy comes from Lebanon. He gets a job at the shawarma shop because he knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get him a job at the shawarma shop. And after a little while, that guy starts to think, well, this isn't so hard. I can do this. Like, it's just making shawarma. There are the vegetables, there's the meat, there's the pita, there's, whatever. And so they open their own shawarma shop. And then this whole scenario replays itself over and over and over again. And quote, it's a rare opportunity, and I love that, a rare opportunity to become royalty. It's always shawarma king, shawarma prince, shawarma princess, shawarma palace. Have you noticed that, he says? Yeah. Yes, we've noticed. Yeah, Al Hajar. It's great. It's such it's a fun read. It brought back a lot of memories. Yeah, it really did.
Absolutely. Yeah. No doubt about it.
From Ron Corbett in the Ottawa Business Journal. It's just.
I'm getting hungry now, Rob. Good.
Yeah. I could go for a big plate of that stuff. Actually. We'll talk next week, David. Thank you.
All right, Rob.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Week. Yeah, you too. Bye bye. Coming up next, Ben Spur, the transportation reporter with the Toronto Star, will talk about his major investigation into Boxfish Consulting, Boxfish Infrastructure Group. The familiar Ottawa name, Brian Guest, big-time political heavy hitter here in the Ottawa area, was named a vice president with Metrolinx at the same time that his firm, Boxfish, was being awarded millions in contracts from Metrolinx. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Rob Snow Show, City News.
News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Monday, January 24th. Good morning. I'm Danielle Bain. Right now in Ottawa, it's minus 19, and in Smiths Falls, minus 17. That extreme cold warning still in effect. Here's what's making news this hour. With another 4,790 new cases today, the province has passed 1 million COVID patients since the pandemic began. The total number of cases has reached 1,001,455. There are 3,861 people in Ontario hospitals now with the virus, 615 in the ICU. 37 more deaths have been recorded in the province due to COVID-19. And there are 339 new cases in Ottawa, 73 in Eastern Ontario, 40 in Leeds, Grenville, Lanark, and 52 in Renfrew. Starting today, Quebecers will have to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination to enter big box stores, except for grocery stores or pharmacies. Premier François Legault says that 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine is the requirement right now, although it could change to 3 doses in the future. Along with this, commercial establishments in Quebec that were forced to stay closed during the last 3 Sundays can now reopen their doors. And tensions are soaring between Russia and the West over concerns that Moscow is planning to invade Ukraine. Today, NATO reiterated commitments made, including potential troop and ship deployments. Britain and the States say they would withdraw some diplomats from Kiev, and Ireland warned that upcoming Russian war games off its coast would be unwelcome. City News Time, 11:33. I'm Danielle Bain, and for news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Firm.
Fair.
Fun.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
Public transit in Ottawa has had it's had a rough go of it of late. Buses that don't work when there's a blizzard. Now, it was a blizzard last week, and on honest to goodness, Environment Canada issued a blizzard warning for Ottawa. But nevertheless, you have the Amalgamated Transit Union saying hundreds of buses were stuck. A lot of them were articulated buses. We talked about that the day after. And once more, we have, this raging debate about snow tires for the transit fleet, for Ottawa's buses, and questions about why we even buy buses that don't work in the very worst kind of winter weather that Ottawa has to offer. Now, our light rail system, strangely enough, some would say miraculously, actually worked all day and as designed in that blizzard, but then failed when it was really, really cold outside because of, we are now told by the head of the Transit Commission, Councillor Hubley, a clamp moved a few millimeters, just a few millimeters, because of the cold, and that was enough to shut down at least half of the line of a $2 billion light rail transit system, and shut it down for the whole day. Because one clamp that attaches the wire to the train, the catenary, moved just a few millimeters. Because it was really cold, like minus 29. But it gets cold in Ottawa in January. One clamp, that's it. It basically rendered light rail transit useless for the day. That was light rail, the latest light rail problem. Now, if you're going to read one story today, you should make it Ben Spur's story in the Toronto Star. Heck of a story. Major investigative piece in the Toronto Star this morning. Ben Spur is the Toronto Star's transportation reporter. That's his beat. Good morning, Ben Spur.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you back here on City News. Today, you're writing about Metrolinx. You're writing about our public transit system here in Ottawa, but other major public transit systems across the province. A firm called Boxfish and an individual named Brian Guest. An individual with a major league history here in Ottawa as a political heavy hitter, both municipally and in federal politics as well, in liberal circles. So why did you want to write about Brian Guest? What prompted this investigation for the Toronto Star?
Yeah, it's a good question. Basically, to be candid with you, I've just been hearing for a number of years about this firm that was working closely with Metrolinx, which is, of course, a really powerful transit agency that's funded by the province. And I had heard some concerns over the years about the way that Boxfish and Brian Guest had operated at Metrolinx, and just some concerns about the degree of influence he had at the agency. So I started to look into that a bit more and came across this situation where, which I think is a kind of unusual situation by any stretch, that he'd actually been, while working as a private consultant, he'd been appointed to an executive role within this publicly funded agency. And while he was in that role, his firm Boxfish was awarded contracts to do work at Metrolinx. So, Metrolinx, I should be clear, he says that there was no conflict of interest here. No, he had no influence on awarding those contracts. But, I think the public can look at that and I think it'd be understandable that there'd be some concerns about a powerful publicly funded agency giving contracts to the firm of someone who it's appointed as a vice president.
Yeah. So you have Brian Guest and his firm, Boxfish Consulting, Boxfish Infrastructure Group, a consulting firm. And it's his firm. He's a director there. Which is fine if he's doing work for Metrolink as a consultant and is billing Metrolink as a consultant. But this is, well, Metrolink calls it unique and temporary in your reporting. But here it went beyond that because he was, for a time, named a vice president at Metrolink. So how does Metrolink explain that, his appointment as a vice president?
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind, I guess, is that they say that while he was vice president, he wasn't given a salary from Metrolinx. He was presumably still just being paid by his own private firm, Boxfish. But what Metrolinx says is that, they have this huge amount of work to do. They have all these, $80 billion worth of transit projects to build over the next 10 years. They don't have enough in-house employees to get it all done and to have the kind of smartest people on board. What they need to do is they need to go out to the private sector and hire on these consultants. And then once they hire on those consultants, they say it's only efficient for them to kind of embed those consultants into their agency while they're working on these projects. So they say it's routine for them to kind of give people who are private consultants and not directly on their payroll, give them titles within their organization. And, I think that there's the experts I talked to say that there's some validity to that the public agency needs to make use of a private sector expertise. But even Metrolinx acknowledges that this is unusual that a consultant would be appointed to such a high-level position. And again, I think once you see that his firm is winning contracts while he's in that position, I think there's a sense that there could be some concerns there of a conflict of interest.
He may not have been drawing a salary as a vice president at Metrolinx, but was his firm winning business from Metrolinx while he was a vice president at Metrolinx?
Yes, that's what I've reported, that the Boxfish won a sole source contract first, and then won a larger, it looks like a larger competitively tendered contract while he was vice president.
And how much are these contracts worth? Any idea?
So Metrolinx wouldn't divulge the dollar amounts of those contracts. Sources I spoke to said that Boxfish is set to earn about $20 to $30 million over the course of 2 years. So certainly not an insignificant amount of money. And I guess I just should say, that Metrolinx says, again, that they insulated guests from any decision-making role here at Metrolinx. But I spoke to sources including, former senior Metrolinx employees who found it really hard to believe that Guest could be successfully insulated from some of these important decisions because he's had such an influential role at the agency. They talked about he had a very instead of what most consultants do, which is just advise the government, it seemed often to these former employees that he was actually making decisions on behalf of Metrolinx, and it's very hard for them to believe that he would it would be possible to fully shield him from these decisions, including things like awarding contracts.
So in addition to any advice or consulting work that Boxfish has done with light rail here in Ottawa, what other projects has this firm been involved with that Metrolinx is overseeing?
Right. So Metrolinx, they originally hired Boxfish on as part of a larger contract. They were a subcontractor to a really large contract at the agency that dealt with some of their biggest projects, really, the expansion of the GO Transit rail system here in the GTA. The Ottawa LRT is separate from Metrolinx work. So he's also done consulting there while at the Ottawa Rail Office, and then again, I think in the mid 2016 thereabouts, he came back to the Ottawa Rail Office for a little bit. He's also worked on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT here in Toronto, which is billed as the largest infrastructure project in the country. So it's certainly he's been involved in some really important work.
And how's that going, by the way? Is it on time, on budget?
It is not. The Eglinton Crosstown is facing delays and cost overruns. The company that's building it, attributes that to a lot of that to the COVID pandemic, and they've won some legal arguments over that case, and you can kind of understand how COVID might have slowed things down. But even before then, it was missing construction deadlines and was facing some problems for sure.
Okay, what have experts in public administration told you about this arrangement? What concerns are they raising here?
Yeah, there's kind of a range of opinion from experts I spoke to. A good number of them told me that there was some validity to this idea that a public agency like Metrolinx, it might be in the best interest of them to hire on private consultants. But I did speak to some experts like Wayne Petrozzi, who's a professor emeritus at Ryerson University, who just said, full stop, like you shouldn't be appointing a private consultant to a vice president role at a public agency. It's just it doesn't. The optics of it are not good, and it provides a basis perhaps for conflicts of interest. He said that Metrolinx's argument that they have all this work to do and they have to hire consultants on to do it is actually an argument against hiring consultants. If you have 10 years worth of projects to be building, you should be hiring permanent, publicly paid employees instead of having to rely on consultants. Yeah. Just basically experts said that it's really important that there be appropriate firewalls put up around a person like Guest if he's in that role. I think the kind of question on people's minds is whether or not that was the case here. Metrolinx says it is, but I think the public deserves the right to kind of scrutinize this situation.
Yeah. And I mean, the standard with conflict of interest is not, is there a conflict of interest? Is there even the appearance of a conflict of interest? So
that's right. And I think it's sometimes impossible to avoid conflicts of interest. You see people, getting elected to government, for instance, who have previous in business interests, and it's kind of difficult to fully prevent that. I think what's kind of unique here is that this seems to be a choice that Metrolinx has made, right, to hire on a private consultant and all of the kind of baggage that comes with that. So I think this is, as you say, the appearance is often as important as the, what's actually gone on. And I should stress again that I've seen no kind of direct evidence that Guest or his firm directly influenced the awarding of contracts to his company. But again, I think just the appearance of things, I think the public can reasonably voice some concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Ben Spur, for the update. Great reporting.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it immensely this morning. Yep. Ben Spur is a transportation reporter with the Toronto Star. This is City News.
Have you heard the news? News.
101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
So it is time for Money Monday with Peter Fraser, who is with us. It's I'm just going to bring Peter on. We do have a topic to talk about, but the markets. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Rob.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a terminal there in front of you, Peter, but it's really getting ugly there on the markets right now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down almost 1,000 points right now.
Yep. Yeah, it's the fear trade for sure.
The fear trade. Okay. I mean, when Peter, I don't want to jump too far away from our topic, but I mean, so far, I think about the conversation we had at the end of the year, what a great year it was for the stock market. And here we are, we're in the third week of January. I just looked this up. The TSX is down more than 5% so far year to date. The Dow is down 8%. The NASDAQ is down 16% year to date. And the S&P 500 is down 11%. And it's not 4 o'clock yet. And that's the thing with some of these markets. They're so darn volatile, you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, they can look like this at noon, and who knows what they'll look like at 4 o'clock. But as a financial planner, if somebody's watching these markets, like, what's your advice? Don't?
Well, that sounds trite, but there is a measure of accuracy to that. I mean, it's always important to know what you own, and it's always important to have high conviction around, who you'll go to war with. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
We've also come off 2 years of incredible really excessive highs, and so some of this is expected, but it also becomes a bit of a feeding on itself phenomena that requires, I think, a plan. I thought this today, as I was saying, we force ourselves to look at the horizon, and the horizon in my business are, what are the features around your plan?
Yeah.
And there is, serious noise. I don't make light of it in the here and now, but again,
is it going to matter 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 25 years from now? That's or whatever your horizon is, right? Yeah.
I think it's a part of the antidote that helps us to keep going. Yes, is to not stand at the side of the ship and look at the swells.
Yeah, good way to put it, Peter.
For the moment.
So I should turn off my stock ticker right now.
Well, or we talk about something else that people don't often talk about, and that's how come life insurance can play a fun role in your financial plan. How about that?
Nothing says fun like life insurance, Peter.
Yeah. So here's what the wealthy and the wealthy wannabes use life insurance for, and I'll try to make it quick because I think we're up against the clock. But a lot of people don't know that insurance is an asset class that can actually produce very good enhanced investment returns. So a key characteristic of it is that investments in a policy can grow tax sheltered. So I often say to people, think of it like a jumbo TFSA. Obviously, tax exempt returns are helpful. Management fees inside of policies are generally very reasonable, and returns are good, especially relative to risk. So, cash on cash returns are quite high when a death benefit pays out. But there are 3 or 4 pieces that go into this. Another reason people use insurance, I say the affluent and those working hard to join them hold insurance as a very important tool. And why is that? Well, you can also use it to equalize an estate, which is very common, where we see some assets being left to one individual as opposed to being shared by everybody. And you can think of the family farm or the cottage.
So I have $1 million house.
Right.
And I'm going to leave that to this child. And I have, $300,000 in securities, but I'm going to buy, say, a $500,000 policy or a $800,000, and I'll top them up or whatever. Right. Yeah. I can see that.
It's a liquidity provider.
To equalize the estate. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And a lot of Canadians donate to charity. So a third reason that it's so valuable in a plan is that people who make gifts in their lifetime often plan to continue that at their death. And for some people, it's even a really large gift. So charitable gifts can be made by investing in life insurance that just funds for that purpose when you die. And lots of ways to innovate, and some of them include making your premiums tax deductible. But, you can simply invest in a policy, name a charity
that pays out at your death, and as an added bonus, your estate has a donation tax credit to whittle away at some of the taxes owing. Which brings me to number 4, one of the biggest ones, that life insurance is often used to pay taxes owing quite a bit more cheaply. So
okay.
Sometimes people know that their registered assets are fully taxable at death. I find often they're not fully aware of that. So if you have a $500,000 RSP today, it's not inconceivable that there could be a couple of $100,000 in taxes owing on that. Investment assets and capital gains are all deemed to be owing at death. So it's absolutely possible to calculate that number, project it into the future, and consider funding that with insurance that just pays the taxes owing, but at a lot less expense, like basically pennies on the dollar. So you can help seriously eliminate some wealth erosion with that, and obviously fund some cash shortages at death. So
yes, and don't be like Rob Snow and watch that ticker.
Well, you didn't watch
Speaking
it for the last
of wealth
7
erosion,
minutes,
shares in Shopify are down 33% so far this year. Okay, not today, just so far this year. They've lost a third of their value. So.
Yeah.
But,
now, if you wind the clock back farther, you're still on a net basis. I won't say looking pretty good this year, but...
well, yeah, they're $1,000 a share, and 5 years ago they were $130 a share. So if you know, you've still done pretty well, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Peter, really interesting day. We'll see where the markets are at 4 o'clock, and hopefully with your advice, our listeners don't have to worry about watching the markets hour by hour.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
I'm at cardinalplanning.ca, and thanks for the time.
Excellent. Yeah, Cardinal Planning, Manulife Securities, Money Monday, Peter Fraser. And that's the Rob Snow Show for today. We're back tomorrow, 9 o'clock news. Rob Snow Show, City News.
The Rob Snow Show.
Weekdays at 9 on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley.
This program is brought to you by